Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. I met Mrs. Glassman when we did an event together in Woodmere, and it was very emotional for me, even though I'm in the field, having done an event with someone as strong and courageous as Mrs. Glassman, who really stepped up to help bring awareness to something that most people in her situation try to hide from. I'm confident that this evening is going to prove to be educational, informative, and most of all, help us break the stigma associated with dealing with those that are suffering from addictions. We need to show the world, step by step, brick by brick, community by community, that these matters will no longer be brushed under the rug. It's not an easy task. We know that it's more than not easy. Thank you, Mom. It's extremely difficult. But it's something that must be done. Over the last couple of weeks, we've done a few events, and people have asked me, at what point are you going to give up? Or why do you keep speaking and giving the same message over and over and over again? And my answer is, I don't plan on giving up or stopping until we no longer have this issue, or we find appropriate solutions for those that need help. And I'm not going to bury my own head in the sand by believing that there's a magic wand and that it's going to be easy, because we know it's not. But we certainly have no excuse to not do whatever we can to try. So really the thanks goes to those of you that are here tonight to take your time to show that you care about this issue and to take those first important steps to say that we as a people, we as a community, we as human beings are going to do whatever we can to deal with this. One of the main issues, and this is something that I've been speaking about and I'm going to keep doing it, that we have in dealing with this epidemic is the shame, the stigma associated with it. The many people that are purposely looking the other way because they're embarrassed about what's going on and don't want to admit to it. Just recently, and if anyone's heard me in the last few weeks, I apologize. I'm not a public speaker in the sense that I come up with new material for each speech. I think the message is as important each time we say it. But if not too long ago, we had a married woman in her 40s with 5 children that was suffering from a serious opiate addiction due to a car accident that she was in many years prior. And it got to the point that her husband reached out and said, we can't do this anymore, we need help. And we had a meeting in the house. The husband, the wife, a therapist, interventionist, myself, and the family's Rav. And we came up with some options of treatment for her. And she turned and said, there's no way I'm going to a drug rehabilitation program. And I said, why not? And she said, I have kids to marry off, and if word gets out that I was a drug addict, no one's going to want to marry my kids. So I looked at her straight in the face and I said, but you do realize you may not make it to walk your children down the aisle. And she said, that could be, but if my children are an orphan, they'll get a good shidduch. If their mother's a drug addict, they won't. That is the stigma that we need to fight. Because sadly, she may not be wrong in her thoughts, because if as a community, I'm sorry. If as a community we're not stepping up to the plate and making it okay to help people that are suffering from addiction, then we're just as much a part of that problem. Now, in this specific case, I'm happy to report, Baruch Hashem, she is getting treatment, she is getting help. and things are heading in the right direction. But at the end of the day, this is still a very, very big problem. And there are many others like her. There are families that we meet with on a regular basis. We'd love to put our child in treatment, but what will the neighbors think? What will the friends think? And then we have the other side, where we have people that are getting help, and then when they come out, they're not getting the support that they need to stay sober. And then many times that becomes a reason why people end up falling and relapsing. Whether it's helping those that are recovering, getting them jobs, making sure they get into school. But I do need to mention this, and this is the hardest thing to mention is, and there are those times that we really do everything, and sometimes it just doesn't work either. And while that is sad and while that does happen, we can't let that deter us from trying to continue to do as much as we can. If somebody's ashamed or embarrassed by their loved one, be it spouse, child, or parent, that loved one will know it. And by them knowing it and by them feeling it, it's going to take away their drive to want to get help. So we have an obligation as human beings to be there to support those that are suffering from addiction. And to understand that drug addicts are not bad people. They're not evil. They're people in pain. People that are using the substance for one reason or another to be able to deal with what for many of us is just everyday life, and they can't. People ask, how do you find this problem getting solved? Or how do we put an end to it? So I see that based on the, I'm sorry guys, I apologize, my throat's killing me. I'm looking around the room and I see people here that seem like we have, myself included, children in school age. If we can't get the schools that our children go to step up to the plate and start bringing the proper education and awareness into the school system, then we are way behind the eight ball. There are programs that start in 5th grades, some schools in 4th, but 5th and 6th grades for sure in the general world is the right age to teach about issues such as addiction and many other issues, whether it's sexual abuse prevention and many other things. And I find it ironic when we teach our children to swim, we're not scared they're going to purposely jump into the pool and try to drown. And when we teach our children to cross the street, to look both ways, we're not scared that they're going to say, oh, let me test it out and not look. But when we go to the schools and say we need to bring proper education into the school systems, oh no, we can't do that. If we bring that up, they're going to try it. I think it's up to us as the parents to bring an end to that and to let the schools allow us to start bringing in proper education. And then one of the other things that is really important for those of us to note, and this is something very crucial because, you know, it's unfortunate that it was the large rate of drug overdoses that pushed us to start doing more and more of these events as often as we are. And when I say the large rate, it's well over 150 since last Rosh Hashanah, so it's about a year and a few months ago, of the age 35 and under within our community. That's a lot more than Zika killed. But I see people spending whatever money they can on Zika, whatever money they can on other epidemics, whatever resources and pressure they can put on communities to create safety measures, but we're losing minimum of 2 precious souls a week. And I don't see the same response. I wonder why. But what's extremely important to note is most of these people that have overdosed did not want to die. And the terminology that we continuously use of accidental overdose is an extremely important one. And I'd love to take a moment and explain where that comes from and why that happens. When people use substances to bring themselves a loss of less pain or less suffering, our bodies are built in a very unique way to build up a tolerance. And as people use more substances, they need to use a higher dosage to achieve the same high. And this goes on until they either succumb to that illness or they can actually get clean and get sober. So we'll use round numbers. Somebody starts off using 1 milligram of a substance. And then as time goes on, they go to 2 and to 5 and let's say 10, and they end up using 100 milligrams. And then they get sober. When they get sober, our body is built in such an amazing way that the body rebuilds up that resistance that it shouldn't take in foreign bodies. And now somebody falls off the wagon for one reason or another, and they remember the most recent dosage that they were using to get that desired high. And they unfortunately make that assumption that I can't deal with this, I need to just get high just one time just to get over whatever I'm dealing with now. And they use a much higher dose than the body can tolerate. And that unfortunately leads to what we consider an accidental overdose. I know many of these people that passed away. They're friends of mine, people that I grew up with, people in my community. A few weeks ago, on a Friday afternoon, just before Shabbos, one of my neighbors calls me screaming, "Come to the backyard emergently. I have a shared alley with a parking driveway." So I yelled, "Do I need my paramedic equipment? Do I need my Hatzalah bag? Just come." So I go running down. 21-year-old girl sitting in a car, completely discolored, of a heroin overdose. Baruch Hashem, we were able to bring her back. But that was because we caught it in time. But what's also important to note is many of the reasons why people end up going to substances and how we can do things to prevent those as well. I'm not going to go into all of that. That's not the focus of tonight's speech, but I just want to touch on it just for a moment. Whether it's those that had issues of being learning disabled in school and the schools didn't catch it early enough, they became victims of bullying, victims of sexual abuse that didn't get the proper help. We see that a very high rate of that in the field of drug addiction and other addictions as well. Peer support, peer pressure can work for you or against you. Peer pressure can destroy people, peer support can save them. Can't tell you how many people were seemingly had no issues, but their friends were doing something, so hey, they felt that they needed to try it as well. And when people are suffering from these things, whether they're being bullied in school, whether they were abused, whether they had another trauma, and we don't catch it early enough, and then they turn to other things, so when we're finally realizing that they need the help because they're addicted to something, we also have to understand the underlying factor as well. Because we need to also work on solving that to be able to help people. But we also have to remember that these issues are not specific to any one specific community. Religious, not religious, from Hasidish, Litvish, Sephardi, Jewish, not Jewish, makes no difference. The drugs, addiction in general does not discriminate. It's not limited to people by age or gender. But we also have to know that different communities, these issues manifest differently. And it's important for us to take a look around and know in the communities that we're in, what could we do to get early detection of these issues so that we can help people before it's too late? And then a lot of times, once people start with addictions and then they don't get the proper help and they're suffering from other ailments, it then starts manifesting into many other issues in their own personal life: emotional, behavioral, religious, loss of self-worth, promiscuity, and just so many other things that are just heading down a very, very dangerous path. And then many times people that don't get the help they need end up, whether it's homelessness, acts of violence, teen pregnancies, interactions with law enforcement, and many times, sadly, death, whether by choice or accidental. But what we have to remember is that this is not a new phenomenon either. This has been going on for years. Maybe with the invention of the internet, media, things are being able to be pushed out more. Yeah, we're certainly seeing a surge now than we've had in many years. But the common denominator is that for hundreds of years, the method was brush it under the rug. And that's what we have to change right now. That's why we're all here, and that's why myself and my amazing dedicated staff work so hard with each and every person that comes for help to try to get them the help that they need. We look at life as the most beautiful painting. I use the example of the Van Gogh painting Starry Night. And when you look at that painting, it's beautiful. You turn that painting into a puzzle, and it still looks like a beautiful picture, but now you see the lines through it as a puzzle piece. And then we start taking out pieces of those puzzle, one by one. And while we know that's a very beautiful picture, but we see those missing pieces. Our job is to help put that puzzle together piece by piece, person by person, family by family. The other common misconception is that this is an issue that is dealing with teens, high school age, maybe college age children. I can't tell you how many clients we have coming to us now in their 30s, 40s, and 50s suffering from serious addictions that they can't get out of, or they don't think they can. Many times we hear about that young adult or someone who's, I'm not trying to point fingers, this is not anything recently, I'm not trying to cause embarrassment. But all too often we hear about the 40 and 50-year-olds that had a massive heart attack and suddenly died. And while that may be true, it may also not be true. And as someone who has done taharas on many of these people, all the signs are there that these people were using for a long time and didn't get the help that they needed. So it's not just about breaking the stigma in the age groups in high school age, college age, or even middle school. But it's understanding where these things come from and that it happens everywhere. And that's our job. When dealing with these issues, many times we come in contact with the communal leaderships, the rabbinic leaderships, organization leaderships. And while I must say that overall, we're certainly gaining a lot of traction. People are realizing more and more that addiction is real. People are dying. We're losing people around us. It's still not enough. When I remember the story of the 14-year-old boy that was molested in a mikveh, and the rabbi was approached, and the rabbi made the boy apologize to his 37-year-old abuser. And when the rabbi was asked, "What are you doing? What's going on here?" the response was, I don't want this guy to go to jail. He's got a family. So the boy will get out of it. He'll get over it. We don't want to make a big deal. And I look at the rabbi and I say, that statistics clearly show that a person who does this will offend again. Who knows who the next victim will be? And he quotes, or he misquotes, let me say, the laws of Masira, the laws of reporting. Horrifically misquotes it. Fast forward 3 years later, I get a call about a 17-year-old drug addict who broke into a shul and stole money from a pushka to buy drugs. And as I'm dealing with the people who called me to try to work out some sort of treatment program while he's going through the criminal process, I look at the name of the shul that pressed charges against him. And it's the same shul that a few years prior the Rav had mentioned we can't put an abuser in jail because of Masira. And the worst part was, this was the same boy that was abused 3 years prior. And I go back into the Rav and I said, "How dare you?" And he looks at me with a straight face and goes, "You can't let people steal from Mammon Hektish, from shul money." There's no excuse for that. Thank God that boy now is actually doing great and getting married shortly, Baruch Hashem. Because if we don't have the happy endings to these stories, it doesn't allow us to continue with the work we do. But it's the stories like that that I lose sleep over, where we have such a misconception of reality. We turn the victims into the abusers. We turn those that are suffering into the bad people. I mean, there's a very, very dear friend of mine, a colleague, who runs a high school for girls. And he mentioned at a meeting a few weeks ago with a group of Rabbanim in Flatbush, he said, can you understand that when I have parents, mothers coming to me who have problems with their children, they turn to me and say, I wish my child would have cancer, because then I would have a support structure. People would care. People would want to help. But when they hear that my child is suffering from these issues, whether it was having been abused, using drugs, no longer wants to be religious, there's nowhere for me to turn. That is what we need to change. That is the message that we need to give home. We have to be there. When we say, Lo tamed al dam reyacha, we have to mean it. Those that are suffering are no less a chola, no less someone who is sick, than someone who's lying in a hospital dying of something else. They're just not. And the same way, as a volunteer, I would go out on Shabbos because someone's having a heart attack. We go out on Shabbos to help someone who's suffering from these things as well. There is no difference. A couple of years ago, we had someone that was coming out of detox, and we were setting them up with a rehab program. For whatever reason, and there was an insurance issue, and we got an approval, which in itself is a miracle in this field. We have to, side note, anyone that has good advocacy with insurance companies, we'd love to get them to start covering treatment. I'm not sure how to pull that off, but let's try. And whatever the reason was, the discharge date from the detox had to match the admission date to the rehab, and this was on a Friday afternoon. And we arranged for a flight for this guy to go Friday late afternoon to go to rehab. And the family rabbi calls me up and says, how can you do this? It's Shabbos. And I said, how can you not? It's Pekuach Nefesh. Oh, stop. He's been clean already. He was in detox for a week. He's going to go Saturday night. I couldn't argue anymore. I tried. My pleas fell on deaf ears. Saturday night never came. Sunday morning we had a levaya. Saturday night, wait one more day. I would never hear a Rav say, don't call Hatzalah Friday night for a heart attack, wait till after Shabbos. But people don't understand what addiction is. They don't understand what mental illness is. They don't understand what sexual abuse is. And therefore they make these mistakes. It's not because they're bad. I want to be very clear. It's because they're not as educated as they need to be. So having an opportunity to come here, to be welcomed to the West Hempstead community, and I'd like to thank Tova for really putting this together, and the Rabbanim and the leadership here, and Rabbi Kellemer, who may he have a refuah shalema, who I've dealt with on these matters many times, a gem, a real gem of a person who understands these things. We need to do more by educating the public, making people aware of it. And those of us that have children in school, we need to force our schools that our children go to. The power of the dollar has to work over here. We pay tuition for our kids to go to your schools. You're going to educate our children for the issues going on today. We had a booth at an expo recently. A husband and wife team that ran a summer camp walked by, and we were trying to promote a safety training for sexual abuse awareness for staff in camps. And the husband who runs this camp looks at us and goes, that's not for us. We don't have those problems in our camp. And I turned to him and I go, which camp are you in? Wasn't so-and-so a counselor by you? And he just looked at me and goes, you know? I said, I know more than you think I know. So how about you listen to what we have to say so we can actually make sure that doesn't happen again? Our job here is to really do what we can do to make sure that no more people have to suffer from losing a loved one, and that we can bring proper awareness and really help those who need the help. And whether it's coming to Amudim or going to any other organization that you have in your local community, if you know someone who needs help, please reach out and ask for it. And when they get the help, be there to support them through it. extremely important point that I'll leave you off with. When somebody comes out of treatment and they're sober, they need you more then than ever before. We need to help keep them sober. We need to help make sure that they have a reason to live. They have a reason to wake up every morning, a loving family, loving community. There is no shame. There is no stigma. We're not going to make believe we're living in a world we don't live in. The shtetl is over. It's done. It's March 2017. We're living in a world today that we can no longer keep our head under the sand. And while I say this all the time, I hope for the day that we no longer have to have any of these meetings or any of these events. But until that day comes, we're going to do our part, stay here, and try to help raise awareness and help each and every person that comes by. Thank you all very much.